Needless to say, if judged according to the prevailing contemporary standards, the gentlemanly ethos was nothing but politically correct. In its various historical incarnations, it was usually elitist, ethnocentric, sexist, and racist. It was generally paternalistic, advocated discriminatory attitudes about lower social classes, and in some cases, promoted imperialism. In those uncommon instances in which the ethos still finds political expression today, it is usually regarded as reactionary. And yet it also provided a rare harmonious ideal for the well-lived life that united the public and the private, as well as the aesthetic and the moral. On the decline of genteel virtues from gentility to technocracy, Jeff Mitchell. Milize. Liberté et égalité was still in ruins. Given that only a year had passed since the large-scale offensive, that was not surprising. What were once bustling boulevards and packed department stores were now empty. Mannequins lay outside the shops that they inhabited, even more lifeless than they already were. They were often nude, for even as the Grand Moor crumbled, more than a few citizens of the Republic chose to loot even the inessential, a sign among many of the Republic's frivolous decadence. Yet the large-scale offensive had neither rid the Republic of internal division nor brought the Alban people together in a spirit of solidarity. Instead, the latent fissures among the Albans ruptured, as their common target of hatred, the Colorata, the 86, left as newly adopted citizens of the Federacy. For it was easy for the poor Alban in the higher numbered districts to be contented with his status, and it was tolerable for the rich Alban in the single digit districts to stay in his company so long as the 86 were both beneath them, as mere pigs. But that golden era had passed. Liberté et égalité was named after two of the cherished fivefold principles of the revolution: liberty and equality. Few names could be so literal in meaning as that of the name for the capital city of the continent's first democratic republic. And yet, liberté et égalité, whether before the Grand Moor or afterwards, barely reflected the spirit of the name with which it was given. Even in ruins, the inequality of the Republic still loomed large. Housing was one perfect example. Out in the available open spaces, such as the repurposed public parks, were tens of thousands of tents. Food was bare, a few scraps of stale bread that the Federacy could charitably spare. Water was carefully rationed, so the inhabitants of such tent villages often smelt. Thirst was prioritized over cleanliness. Disease therefore ran rampant to the surprise of no one. Medicine was scarce, as the Federacy publicly stated that it could only spare the bare minimum for first aid. The number of soldiers that had returned without a limb, or any for that matter, was stupendously high, and the scanny profiteers seized the stockpiles in the ruins. President Ernest Zimmerman, for his part, had his party file a bill in light of such circumstances to expand aid to the Republic. Said bill was frequently tabled by the interim Diet of the Federacy. Such was the will of the newly born democracy of Jihad. For even the fire-breathing dragon of the Federacy could only afford to burn so much political capital, mused a young colonel in an unexpected bout of cynicism, who added for good measure a generous teaspoon of synthetic sugar substitute to an equally synthetic tea substitute. That is, a fair bit of saccharin poured onto an ineffable cup of something that clearly was not made from tea leaves. While unexpectedly mediocre, even a synthetic cup of tea such as this still counted as a luxury, a marker of one's elite status in the ruined republic. But a few Albans remained as fortunate. Few possessed the ties to the puppet government, to the murky black market and criminal gangs that all sprang in the ruins, or to both that were necessary to survive in this new world. These so called fortunate ones all resided in the former villas of the first district. Such many had been made of marble to better fit the silver features of their illustrious residence. Everyone, after all, was dead, so everything was there for the picking. However, that was not to say that many of the fortunate ones were unfamiliar with said villas, some of which were old enough to have housed actual nobility prior to the revolution. For even social upheaval could only dent the inherent inequality of San Magnolian society so much. An excellent example was that of the Milize, a royal line, many of whom had their heads lopped off during the Revolutionary Terror, which still survived to this day, an uncanny degree of prestige and power intact. One such Milize, through blood and marriage, resided in a former villa reserved for the fortunate ones. She was currently engaged in a cup of tea with her daughter, a newly promoted colonel of the Republican Army who was presently serving with the Confederacy's 86th Strike Package. Margareta Milize would not have been considered a fortunate one if it were not for her daughter. Again, Margareta silently thanked her daughter's foolish stubbornness, a stubbornness that Vladelina had shared with her equally foolish father. That stubbornness meant that the Milice had survived, even the Legion, and were, as it happens, in an excellent position to thrive. Mother, I have an announcement to make. Lena's hands trembled as they carried a precious porcelain teacup. Somehow, a fragile family heirloom had managed to survive both the revolution and the large scale offensive, much like the Milice. Margareta silently scoffed. How could the infamous bloody Regina shiver in nervousness before her mother? Didn't Vladelina realize that if she was so disposed, the young and up and coming officer could easily send her mother out to die in the tents in the memorial park? Then again, Vladelina shares Vaclav's soft heart. Margarita glanced at the shoulder board of her daughter's dress uniform, no longer morning black, finally, adorned with the stripes of a colonel in the Republican Army. Vladelina was ruthless, though, unlike her father. An essential skill in high society, which Margarita was born in and married to, was the ability to gather, receive, and process information. That is, the fine art of rumor and gossip. While she and that closeted old flame of her deceased husband rarely saw eye to eye, Karl Stahl had still kept her abreast of their daughter's antics. Even before the fall of the Grand Moor, she even read that report that her daughter had prepared, that report which the idiots in Palace Loon had ignored. Together, Karl Stahl and Margareta ensured that any significant opposition that caught on to her daughter's schemes were quashed. Vladelina was good, but not that good yet. That was not out of any belief in her daughter's noble ideals about the Colorado, though. For one good skill any self respecting noble had to have was the ability to hedge one's bets. And Margareta had hedged her bets well, very well. What is your announcement, dear? Margareta had chanced upon a rumor from her old friend, a schoolmate of hers at San Magnolia's School for Young Girls in that Federacy backed puppet government, a Mrs. Blanchette, who was presently serving as the interim minister of agriculture. She had apparently overheard Representative Primrose grumble about a certain girl. Her Excellency allegedly muttered the following in a particularly bitter cabinet meeting after President Zimmerman had relayed concerns that he had obtained from a trusted colonel in the Republican armor. Damn that traitor bitch! She must be sleeping with that subordinate of hers, the Reaper. Unsurprising that pitch favors the pig so much. Meanwhile, Lena was silent for a minute. Her cup of tea was on the table, and Lena did not want it to spill. Water was hard to come by, even here, and to waste her mother's ration on cleaning the upholstery of their chairs or the embroidered cloth that covered their white concert table of stains was simply unacceptable. Appearances always have to be kept, even now. That was her mother's way, the Milize way. Finally, Colonel Milize gathered her wits, or what could be gathered, at least. Lena could not avoid to pause every once in a while out of a nervousness that was impossible to shake. Mother was, even now, an opponent just as formidable as the Legion, to Colonel Vladilina of the 86th Strike Package. For in the end, Lena was just a young girl of 18. Mother, I am presently engaged in mutual courtship with Sir Shine Nozen, captain of the Federacy Armed Forces, a, a colleague of mine who hails from the clan Nozen, a respectable house in the Federacy. Bingo. Margareta smiled. There was a fair amount of bemusement behind those wrinkled features. Lena, on the other hand, was slack-jawed. A fly could pass right through her mouth. Bloody Regina was still as naive as a young girl on her first period, if Lena had expected a fierce condemnation from her mother. On the contrary, Margareta wanted nothing more than to warmly embrace her dearest daughter, which she did, as a matter of both self interest and the selflessness of a mother's affection. Vladelina was caught right in the midst of the future that was yet to be born, a noble flower that was destined to bloom, even if in a foreign court. It was simply common sense for Margareta to be in her daughter's good graces. And I am happy, for a girl as noble in both heart and blood as Vladelina deserves a suitor, a lover, that in addition to possessing a good name, truly cherishes her. Rare is the suitor where both love and pedigree coincide. Truly, I am happy. Tears flowed from the eyes of the emotional daughter, who barely fathomed it all, and did not care a single bit that those arms felt so awkward around her shoulders. Mother only dispensed physical affection infrequently. When was the last time that mother ever gave me such a warm embrace? I am so glad. There were only two other moments where mother and daughter embraced each other so tightly: the funeral of Vaclav Milize and Lena's graduation with honors, summa cum laude from the Republic War College. But a faint voice whispered, skeptical, "Why?" Good. A single word. Many answers, many questions. Lena was still stunned. Are you courting each other with the intent of marriage? Shall I expect an engagement to come soon? I I am. We are courting each other with the intent of marriage. Lena was never more certain in her entire life. While not a single word had been exchanged between Shin and Lena regarding the issue of marriage, for Lena, that was utterly irrelevant. We made a vow before those ancient bones. We would show each other the sea. We would return to each other. Death would not keep us apart. That was our promise to each other. Their vows went deeper than a piece of paper. Margareta nodded. It was impossible for a perceptive lady such as herself to not notice the conviction in her daughter's eye, a burning conviction that was so sparsely found among the unhappy to content brides and grooms from good society. When that jealous man came to deliver news of that transport helicopter that had been shot down in the 86th sector, that was the moment when Margareta had finally understood those eyes. They sobbed in each other's arms, a momentary truce. Excellent. Actually love each other. Truly, what a fortunate girl. Then, Lena asked. Her wits had finally recovered. A single question had to be asked. Why? You expected that I would rant viciously about the unsuitability of pigs for your hand, didn't you? That I would prattle like a common bleacher, Vladelina. While Lena's heart had warmed for a second at that seemingly righteous disdain in her mother's voice, a part of her could not help but feel that her mother's disdain felt off. Her mother mentioned common bleacher as if the bleachers were beneath her. Yes, Margareta sighed. That would have been absolute stupidity. To stick blindly to the rules of the old world is to invite disaster. Remember that, Vladelina. As Nicolo, you recall your lessons at St. Magnolia's. Advised the prince, Lady Fortuna is a beastly woman that must be tamed, and such a bitch may only be tamed through virtue. I assume that you are familiar with virtue, Vladelina. For a brief moment, a flicker of joy appeared in those young silver orbs. Then, a realization. Virtue. To tame Lady Fortune is to be prepared for anything, to adapt to anything. Margareta nodded. Correct! Excellent, Vladelina. There was none of that warmth that accompanied their embrace earlier. This was business. It is futile to continue following the ideology of the old republic. Certainly, the fall of the Grand Moor has proven the utter bankruptcy of those ideas that so many commoners and even more than a few members of our circles insist upon upholding old slogans of pure silvers is a joke, and families can end on the basis of such foolishness. Underneath the table and away from her mother's prying eyes, Lena firmly held her left wrist with her right hand. That grip of her only tightened as Margareta continued to speak. Besides, a new world is being born, one that shall prominently feature the Federacy, one wherein someone such as yourself, someone who has made enormous contributions to the war effort, shall be most comfortable. You have excellent connections. Your suitor is also well placed, from what I have heard. An adopted son of the president, in addition to being a distinguished war hero from one of the noblest warrior families in Giad. Don't look so perplexed. Even now, the noble stock still commands sway in Giad. I am proud of you, Vladelina. Most proud. Lena could not contain herself. So if Shin was a mere commoner, that wouldn't be acceptable for a noble lady of the Milize such as myself? There was sarcasm, dripping from every syllable. Mother, I thought that you had changed. That you realized that everything that we've done against the 86, the Colorado, was wrong. But no, you you still believe that the 86 are pigs beneath us. Margareta smirked. As these were the eyes that laid upon the lieutenant colonel that Lena so skillfully duped before the Grand Moor fell. These were the eyes of bloody Regina, those silver eyes of silver steel. Her eyes. No. For a second time, Lena was agape. No? Yes, Vladelina. No. Do you honestly think that I actually believe that bullshit, Vladelina? What you must understand is that Alban supremacy was a convenient fiction that our house had no choice but to abide with. Here is a lesson that you must take to hear, dear. People can do stupid things for so called ideals. And yes, even hatred of the Colorado was an ideal. Vladelina, an ideal is merely something that people have stupendous amount of irrational faith in. Whether it is good or bad is immaterial. But to our class, ideas are a tool. You know your history, how the National Party purged the entire opposition, sent the dissidents to the 86th sector, all as the foolish commoners applauded. Lena nodded, slowly. Colonel Vladelina Milize. Lena straightened her back, as if called to attention by her commanding officer. You see that teacup on our table? That one which you just used? Again, Lena nodded. That has been in our family for centuries. Margarita Milize had also always been a Milize, even before Vaclav. They were cousins by the third degree. That teacup has survived the revolution, and now it has survived the Legion. You may despise me, Vladelina, disown me if your noble will desire such. If if your noble will desire such, mother sees me as her superior. But you cannot rid yourself of the blood that runs through your veins. Silver met silver, steel met steel. A memory came unbidden to Margareta. She and Vaclav were frolicking in the front of the grand fountain near Palace Loon. You know, Marge, how long, how long the cherished name only he had for her, even if she was just a cruel witch. You say that nobility is all about keeping our noble lines in charge, but isn't nobility about service? Protecting the weak? Isn't that what our centuries of strength and wisdom for? You are a Milize, and our house shall endure as it always has. Try as she might, Vladelina Milize could not refute her mother's words. I love you, Lena. Margareta Milize forgot her pretensions for a moment, and Lena saw just how tired her wrinkled mother was. I merely want what is best for you. I was glad when I met your father. Daughter's eyes widened. Mother barely spoke of father after the incident. He was a good man, and I fell in love with him. That is already rare in our circles, as you must know. Even more rare is for love and pragmatism to coincide. Your beloved is genuinely fond of you, and you of him. He comes from a good, no, a great family of a powerful empire. Margaret pointedly did not acknowledge the fact that the Confederacy had succeeded the empire. I am grateful, Vladelina. Grateful, happy. Now, a young lady cried without reservation as her mother's own cold cheeks began to moisten. Don't, don't cry. That, that is not befitting of your stature, Vladelina. There was no fire in her stern sermon, for Margareta was also crying. When was the last time that I was in tears? When Vaclav had passed. Moron, idiot, fool, beloved. I merely want, I merely want you to remember what I have taught you, what I will teach you. You have your father's heart. He, he has taught you well. Lena, for the first time in a long time, appeared genuinely attentive. What the Republic has made you go through, you shall also experience in the future. To those that have kind hearts, this world is cruel. Only a single name came to Margareta's mind, Vaclav. So you must endure, and more than endure, you must win to save those you wish to save, to protect those you wish to protect. You must be strong. I understand that you wish to fashion a better world, like your father did. Then I am duty bound as your mother to remind you that such a formidable task demands strength. Your name is your strength, Vladelina. I trust. No, Margareta shook her head. I know that you shall do our name justice. With my eyes and your father's heart, nothing is out of reach for you, Vladelina. Nothing.